Welcome, good evening to you. If you've been affected by the cancellation of London, the cancellation of Manchester, or another race, can't remember when Manchester's been postponed to, but it will be around autumn time, I imagine, because it's just avoiding that peak holiday season usually for races like that. So, for a lot of people, some of the people I coach, the challenge now is thinking about, right, okay, I had a race coming up. That race would have been, let me get the calendar up, April time, perhaps March, perhaps April. So you were looking down the barrel of the last couple of weeks, I guess. So most people, you're sort of between your 16 and 20-mile long runs in the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks, probably. Depends where that race is, but I'm being general here. And if that's the case, obviously you're suddenly thinking, well, do I do that long run? Do I bother carrying on with my training? Do I stop now and say, right, October, we'll aim for that? Well, when is that actually? So if we go from April, May, June, July, August, September, October, actually you'd have to start again now. So if you're at sort of 18 miles or thereabouts now, and you're thinking of going up to a 20-mile long run, then you probably are facing quite an unusual and tricky decision. So what I've done in the past when I've been looking at long races, perhaps, and what, if you've ever run an ultra, then this is quite useful for marathon training. So if you're planning a 50-mile race or a 100-mile race or whatever it is, you can't do those sort of distances in one long run. It's just, it'd just be so damaging as to be no beneficial point at all. Instead, ultra runners tend to break them down, and they might do back-to-back runs to get that distance in. And what I'm going to propose for those of you who want to extend your training cycle and to take advantage of this postponement is to think a little bit about that. Because if you're around 18 miles now, your body's gone through maybe that 16 to 20 mile window, your body's gone through a lot of training, a lot of hard effort. And the way you're going to get around that, the way you are going to peak is to hit the taper, drop your mileage, drop your intensity, ultimately remove some of that speed work or all of the speed work within the taper, allow your body to go from a greatening increase of fatigue to a reduction in fatigue through the taper to super compensate and then prepare you for race day. Now, if that doesn't happen, the race day, if there's a temptation to carry on and to keep training anyway, do very much run the risk of overtraining. And it's something that is absolutely to be avoided. So utilising this break as a sort of moment to think, right, I can take a couple of weeks off, or I can taper a little bit, have a false taper effectively. And using that, it will enable you to reduce the fatigue, recover from the effects of the fatigue, but you won't lose your training. So in a study of people who were bedridden, in a hospital I think it was over in the States, they studied a group of people who were for 30 days unable to leave their beds. And what they found was that their fitness dropped off over the course of the 30-day period, approximately 14 to 16%. So that was a performance reduction of 14 to 16%. Now, there was a separate subset of people who were also bedridden in the same hospital, and the study was also included there. Those people were able, though, to do a little bit of walking around. There was a little bit of mobility. They might go to the toilet, the bathroom, perhaps step outside. From that group, they saw only a reduction of approximately 8 to 9% in fitness over a 30-day period. Now, I'm not suggesting you jump in bed and stay there for 30 days. I'm using that as an example to say, actually, if you're taking 2 weeks off, you're doing light exercise during that. And I really mean single figures or lower, perhaps, than that 5-mile mark. If you can get your long runs down to under 8 miles, if you can cope with that distance reduction. And also, actually, if you're running maybe 4 or 5 times a week, maybe just reduce them to 3 for the next 2 weeks, and then shorten them even more in that second week of your what we're calling this false taper. I'd suggest that's a really good way of just reducing fatigue, which is inevitably built up. I always think preparing is key. So if you prepare for that, if you've been marathon training, you are ultimately more at risk in a sense because your body will be fatigued and therefore more at risk of catching some kind of infection or illness. So getting that false tapering now is exactly the right time to beat the odds and to avoid that potential risk. It will reduce your fatigue risk and it will then allow you to start your training. Now, if you want to start your training straight away, that's absolutely fine. But I would suggest you don't start from 18 miles. If you want to keep your mileage up which for many of you is something I'm sure that'll be quite a tempting prospect, because actually, if you're running slow, that's a really good decision, because you're not producing the amount of fatigue that a lot of runners do. They run too fast, mid to high intensity. If you know me for long enough, you'll know I am really, really keen and very, very passionate about slowing people down. If you can't talk when you're running too fast. And that's a generalization. And obviously you'll need a speed workout, but in your week. But for most of us here on this video, we're talking about a specific set of circumstances. So just to reiterate, you've gone through a 2-week. You could run it to 3 weeks if you wanted to, but a 2-week taper period, it's false taper. You've come out the other side of that now, so we're now 2 weeks ahead, and you might want to start thinking about training for your October races. Bearing in mind, you've got to 16, 20 miles in your long run. That's quite a lot. If you reduce your long run to 8 miles, 9 miles maybe, 7 perhaps, you could do a back-to-back run for the next couple of weeks or the next month or so. So that's one run on, let's say, a Saturday, one run on a Sunday, or it might be a long run on your Monday and a long run on Tuesday. Depends when you do your long runs. You don't have to do 8 and 8. You might do 8 miles and 3. So you're still keeping your mileage up. There's still an element of fatigue building in there, which is ultimately what we do want as marathon training, but you're not overstressing your system. By the way, guys, if you've got any questions on this, let me know. I'd love to hear them in the comments. So I think that's quite important to think about. Don't go back after that false taper. Don't go back thinking, right, I was at 18 miles, so I was just going to start my long run at 18 miles, because before you know it, you'll be at 24, 25, 26, 28 miles on your long runs in sort of August, September time, and you'll be utterly exhausted. And ultimately the reason is that it actually takes 2 to 3 weeks to recover from a marathon distance run. That's training, run, race, doesn't matter. It's 2 or 3 weeks to recover from that. Full body-wide recovery, all fatigue gone, inflammation reduced, etc., etc. So, and that's assuming no injury. So the amount of long runs we do, they're really crucial to be. You have to manage them well. I always say this to loads of runners I speak to. Running is the easiest thing in the world. You just got to put one foot in front of the other. But it's the most complicated thing when you look into the detail. So this is a bit of the detail, isn't it? Plan out. So any generic plans you've got, if you're going to carry on training, you can throw them away, because they're not going to work for you if you're carrying on training. If you're happy to start them again, then that's great. Feel free to do that, and you'll be in a great fitness place anyway, because in every training plan, I say it so many times, I'm sure you're bored of hearing me say it, especially if you've been away with me on weekends and stuff. Training plans are great, but do they have recovery built in? So you should be looking for that. So it doesn't matter whether you coach with me or you don't. If you get in a plan from anywhere or anybody, what's that recovery like? Where is it? There should be a plan there to show you how you're recovering. If you've got any questions, just let me know. Just pop them in the comments now. Hope that's useful. So I think that's it, guys. Hope that 20 minutes was useful. If you've got any questions after this, you can pop me a comment in if you've got a question, or just send one to me directly. Right, I'm going to crack on. I'll speak to you soon, guys. If you're running, enjoy it. Hopefully it's going to be some decent weather. I've not seen the weather forecast actually, so I'm looking forward to seeing whether it's a nice day. Right, see you soon. Thanks for joining. Bye now.